y'all could join us for book club. We're going to dive in just a second. We got a power pack night. We're going to be talking about dancing in the darkness with the Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III joining us. Good to see you, my brother.
It's wonderful to be here and great to see you all.
And as folks kind of start tuning in, I know some of y'all are listening to this broadcast afterwards. Some of y'all are joining live from different parts of the world. We've been reading this together this month, and just a few things on the horizon. Oh, by the way, my co-host tonight.
Oh, yeah.
My incredible wife, Katie Jo, who loves Dr. Moss and has heard him preach many times. And we've been reading this book together. I was telling Reverend Moss, we've been reading it back and forth, and it's been a really special read for us, brother. So thank you. And you don't do a lot of these book clubs with me. You don't jump in on every one. So
I don't enjoy
special.
I don't enjoy everyone's book, but you can't say that out loud. But I like this one.
Man.
Thank you.
So we've got like morning prayer coming up in a few days, y'all. Some of you join us at the first of each month, the first day of each month, generally. So at 9:00 a.m. Eastern time, we'll do prayer together with Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove, and we always have a special guest on that. So go ahead and carve that time out. We'll do that all year too. It's almost always 9 a.m. on the first day of the month. Every once in a while we switch it up because of time zones or something, but go ahead and join us for prayer. There's a lot going on in the world. I know we're coming into this evening with all sorts of feelings, the back-to-back shootings in California. There's all kinds of things we're bombarded with, but that's all the more reason to remember that we have got to dance in the darkness. And that's what this conversation tonight is about: spiritual lessons for thriving in turbulent times. So these are indeed some turbulent times. And I thought, Reverend Moss, first, the inspiration of this book, you kind of save till late on, but you give us the heads up that, you dedicate it to your daughter, Michaela. You talk about where the title came from. So I thought we might as well just start out with that, right, brother? Where you got this idea of dancing in the darkness?
Is certainly love to start off there. And again, I just want to say thank you to both of you and the work that you all do. I mean, I admire the ministry, the partnership, the way that you all get into holy mischief all across this land. And it's just such a blessing to have this opportunity to be with you all this evening. As you stated, well, the title of the book really comes from an encounter with my daughter. In the audiobook, she was with me when I recorded the audiobook, and she even recorded the dedication page because she was dedicated to her. That was a really special thing to be in the studio with her. But in 2008, we hadn't been in Chicago very long, and I was pastor, had just started as pastor at Trinity United Church of Christ. And my predecessor, Dr. Jeremiah Wright Jr., had retired. A lot of people don't know that he retired. He had gone on. He was actually out of the country. And I remember working out. It was at Bally's at the time. I think Bally's has been bought out since then. Right. I was warming down on a treadmill. And someone tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, Rev, is that your church up there? And I look on the news, and Sean Hannity is going off about our church. And I said, oh, I've got to go. And so that started the media gauntlet of what we call it. 40 outlets showed up to our church every Sunday, placing microphones in the face of people, hoping to get some type of quote. And then the death threat started. Dr. Wright, myself, the church, we had to get bomb sniffing dogs to come into the church every single service. And so I was on edge for about a year. And the reason was because we had a member by the name of Senator Barack Obama, who was running for president, who became president at that moment. And Sean Hannity got a clip of Dr. Wright's sermon. It was actually a pretty good sermon when you listen to the whole.
It is a very good sermon.
And took that clip out of context and proceeded to attack the church. proceeded to attack the Black church tradition, proceeded to attack the Obama family, and say that, anybody who would be a part of such a church obviously is unpatriotic. This cannot be American. They are communist, terror. I mean, you name it. We were called every name in the book and then some. And so I was on edge consistently. I had to get 24-hour security just about. And Dr. Wright got security. We had to have security at the church. And I remember one evening where we heard some noise in the house. And Monica, my wife, she tapped me and said, "You need to go check that out." And so I got up and grabbed my rod and my staff that comforts me and started looking around the house. That rod and staff is named Louisville Slugger. And I was thinking, is this it? I honestly was thinking, and am I going to have to protect my family in this moment because someone who had been listening to conservative radio or conservative blog thought that we were a threat to the security of America. And I heard the noise again, and I heard the noise coming from my daughter's room, and I opened up the door, and there was my daughter in the middle of her room. She was spinning around in the middle of the room dancing, saying, "Look, Daddy, I'm dancing." Tails going back and forth, and this is 3 a.m. and I have to preach in a few hours. And so I got that low registered daddy voice, and baby, I'm in bed right now. And she's like, "Look, Daddy, I'm dancing." And that's when the Spirit truly spoke. It said, "Stop and look at your daughter. Your daughter is dancing in the darkness. Darkness is around her, but it's not in her." And at that moment, I scrapped my sermon, ran down to my study, and started just writing what was coming out of my spirit in that moment. And the sun came up, put on my clothes. I went to church. I climbed in the pulpit, and I said to the community that we are called to dance in the darkness. Dance with joy, dance with love, dance with justice. That if we are to transform this American democracy, we must learn how to dance in this darkness and in this dark moment. And just as scripture says that God will turn your mourning into dance, never forget that it is not that the sun has forsaken us, but the earth has simply turned. And if you dance long enough, joy will come in the morning, and you witness the light again. And that's really the origin of the title, is that my daughter, Michaela, who's now a freshman at Mercer University in Macon, so shout out to Michaela, is the one who taught me about the power of dancing in the darkness.
So good. And you give a lot of other images too, kind of inspired by that. I remember Reverend Sammy Billy Kyles that you talk about, the boy seeing the man punching through the darkness, so all these great images, jazz, comics, we're going to talk about it. Katie's a little bit more hip than I am, so I had to get a refresher on some of my comics, Reverend Moss, but.
Oh, yeah. Were you going into that one?
No, you go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask about your kind of combination of justice and love. Because you do talk about that early on. You give, I didn't know the story of the Howard Thurman story, when he's at the train station as a boy and that man buys or rebuys his ticket, right? It's a beautiful story. But you're talking about what justice could have looked like in that situation, just justice, and then what just love would have looked like. But when the two are combined, what evolves out of that. So I was going to do one of your quotes, like, "Justice without love can become ruthless. An eye for an eye. That kind of justice risks continuing the cycle of hatred and reprisal that can tear down a community. Justice without love destroys." It was the combination of love and justice that set young Howard Thurman, his future student Martin Luther King Jr., and the American Civil Rights Movement on a path towards the light. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about those two together, because I've never thought about it that way. I've never thought about, I've thought about them, but I've never thought of one not having the other. And that was like mind blowing. So if you could talk about that.
Yes. Yeah. I really appreciate that, because the the idea of love and justice is what haunts the book, is the undergirding of these lessons that we attempt to tell. Love without justice is nothing but sentimentality. Justice without love, as you already read, can become legalism, become brutality. But love and justice, when they're married together, I like to say they walk down the aisle, they get married, and then they produce these two wonderful children named Transformation and Liberation. That true love, and in America, we don't know this kind of love. We know sentimentality. In America, we know justice as a doctrine and something that is legalistic. But in the ancient tradition and all these other traditions in the world, love has to be connected to justice, and justice has to be connected with love. The Bimbe community, ethnic group, tribe in Southern Africa, they believe that when someone does something wrong, you put them in a circle. Elders and the young people get around them, and they don't tell you what you did wrong. They just keep telling you why you're a gift from God.
Wow.
And to the point where you begin to break down and cry and realize that to be restored back to the community is not just knowing your wrongs, but knowing you are a gift. And they spend hours upon hours every day until the child or young person breaks down and realize, I am a gift, weeping, saying I am a gift. And it creates this humility. That's restoration. And in America, we don't connect with this idea. And I think that we have to relearn. Imagine if we had love and justice when we thought through policy. You couldn't have 3 strikes, you're out. We would raise questions about how do we restore people. If we had love and justice, you don't just expel children from school. You would talk about how can we educate them and how can they be restored so they can fully flourish, because love is always whispering in the ear of justice, and justice is always whispering in the ear of love. Of how do we allow someone to operate at their full capacity, and that's the beauty of when we walk with these two things together. And that's what Jesus was always walking with, this idea of agape, that is a just love, a love that is rooted in this idea.
So good. And when we were just, down in Atlanta with the King Center, and I remember Reverend Barber, was quoting that King quote, "Power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic." Exactly what you're saying. You've got a lot of King, in your writing. And it's interesting how we kind of stand on the shoulders of so many others, and seeing, at the King Center, the Gandhi room, and how much Mahatma Gandhi meant to King and shaped a lot of his ideas about nonviolence and forgiveness. And I was thinking, related to justice, you write about forgiveness as well. And Reverend Sharon Risher is listening in today. Oh yeah. Reverend Sharon's listening. Oh, go ahead.
We got to step in your dad's feet at the King Center.
Oh, you did?
His feet are on the sidewalk. They're like implanted in there.
Yeah, we stood right there and gave thanks for you and your dad, your family.
Oh, that is so wonderful. I can't wait to pass that on to Papa. It's such an honor that they would put him in the civil rights
it was amazing.
walk of struggle.
So beautiful. Sorry, I was just thinking to Reverend Risher, though, because she's listening in tonight. And I don't know if you, I think we were all together at the Wild Goose and maybe a couple other places. But, it was her mother, Ethel Lance, that was killed by, in Emmanuel AME. Her 2 cousins, her family was killed. And you talk about that forgiveness. And it's interesting because I've heard Reverend Sharon talk about how stunned she was at how quickly her sister offered that forgiveness. And Reverend Richard talks, her book, we studied it and did it as one of our books of the month too. And she talks about how forgiveness is such a process, and it takes different people, different amounts of time, and you don't want to cheapen forgiveness, and accountability, and what repentance really looks like. So she said one of the same things that you said in your book, which is that the idea that you forgive and forget is a terrible idea, because you forgive, but you remember, and you still have the scars and the memories. say a little bit more, because you write so powerfully about forgiveness. It seems like it's kind of related to justice,
It is. It's a part of it. And America has a challenge with forgiveness because it doesn't know what it is. It's talking about absolution without any accountability or responsibility. That we want after someone commits an act of terror, it's like, oh, forgive. No. Within this idea of Black spirituality, when you're talking about forgiveness, it is more of an ancient form of forgiveness, meaning you're not going to have power, nor are you going to plant weeds in my soul. That's what I'm talking about. When I say I forgive, I release you from having power over me. But that does not mean that in any way that there's not going to be any accountability. It means that I am going to begin to grieve prophetically. How can I change this world? How can I make a shift? America wants absolution, an act that is horrific, have absolution and let's move on. Or it wants to sequester the act. And that's what happened with Dylan Roof. To act is everybody's like, well, on board. Dylan Roof committed this act. But we need to talk about the system that created Dylan Roof. We need to talk about the poison that he ingested, the nutrition that he was fed by this antebellum Confederate mythology that runs rampant, that we call white supremacy, that he had been drinking. And America doesn't want to deal with that. So we want to sequester Dylan Roof as if it's just a horrific act, not knowing that, or not wanting to talk about all of what took to build him. And there are still Dylan Roofs. They may not go into church houses, but they may ban Black history in Florida. They may act as if certain acts of horror should not be talked about or taught children. That's the poison that makes a Dylan Roof.
Thinking of that quote, you have it in the beginning of that chapter. I think it's from Mandela. Resentment is like drinking poison and hoping it will kill your enemies. Well, you want to talk about comics, or what you want to talk about?
Sometimes I'm married to someone who writes books, so I'm often curious about incidents that they experience where you have to live out your own writing. So in this idea of forgiveness, like for you don't have to like name names or throw anybody under the bus, but like what is, I think sometimes we think, God, it's so hard to forgive that friend that hurt your feelings, or it's so hard to, and then when you step back, they seem so unimportant compared to like tragedies, right? And so I'm just curious, in your own personal life, how you've meandered through forgiving people.
It always is a challenge. It's a requirement and a challenge. The wisdom of my mother rests heavy with me, because she's just a wise person. And she would say, you know what, Otis, you're going to allow someone to have that much power over you? You're going to spend that much time thinking about them, and they got that much residence in your heart, in your soul, in your head, and they live in there rent free. You really going to give that much power? Said, you got to release that. And and that put me really thinking about how this idea of forgiveness works. We want the forgiveness of forgetfulness.
Right.
Mom was teaching me the forgiveness of the idea of you need to empower yourself. That person needs to stop living in your house, in your mind, rent free. When are you going to do that? And when are you going to see them as someone who there's such trauma happened to them? Instead of seeing them as a monster, seeing them as a broken person. And then all of a sudden they become smaller in the process. And they all of a sudden the deep anger, you're like, oh gosh, you said they didn't have a family and parents, and they didn't have, they didn't have the kind of things that you had, that an embrace of a village. That's why they so mean, nasty, and acting the way they acted, and here you are letting them live rent free in your head. She's something else, but she helped me understand that American forgiveness can create more trauma. Ancient and spiritual forgiveness can empower.
Yeah, I think again, when one of the things I've heard Reverend Richards say was when she says, I didn't forgive Dylan Roof so he could sleep at night, but so I could sleep at night. You know, I didn't want to be held hostage.
That's it.
Yeah,
that is exactly it, without a doubt.
So we're going to talk about comics.
You're excited. I think she don't even read comics, but he's excited for that.
I have trouble with fiction books and fiction movies. This is a safe place, Reverend Otis. So I'm just going to say, but, I mean, Katie outreads me on everything. We're reading Ibram Kendi's book right now, Stamped from the Beginning, and but she reads a lot of fiction, and I'm stretching myself on some of these Marvel movies I'm trying to watch and things,
Watch them.
But I did like this.
You'll be blessed. You'll be blessed.
I love how you write about them though, and I still had to Google or Wikipedia a few things Storm and all this, but I love that line from Chesterton. You said fairy tales are more than true, not because they tell us that dragons exist, but because they tell us that dragons can be beaten.
That's right.
Good. And
that's right.
I think that's a little fiction theology there. So but what
was the first comic book that you held in your hands and fell in love with?
Without a doubt, it was the X-Men when I was younger. X-Men, then Spider-Man and Batman. But I loved, and then when I found out that Stan Lee, and this is a wonderful thing for those who don't know anything about the comics, when Stan Lee wrote the X-Men, he was trying to figure out how he could write, but also connect with what was happening in the world, specifically the civil rights movement. So Professor X, when he was writing, was this trope of Dr. King, and then Magneto was Malcolm X, and the X-Men were that's what he was trying to communicate. Magneto wanted a separate world for people who had the X gene. And then the idea was, here are people who are different genetically. And because they're different genetically, they are treated differently. But because of Xavier's teaching, they might be the ones who can save the nation.
Right. Good. Storm is one of the X-Men.
Yes.
Do you remember that from your research?
Yes, I did remember that. And the other thing I learned from reading, by the way, you should flash the book again just in case people that are joining us. If you're just now joining us, of course, this is Reverend Otis Moss III, who is many things, pastor at Trinity out in Chicago, but also this is his newest book. And so we've been reading it together, Katie and I. And so there's a section on comics and superheroes and villains. And I was really intrigued by the several things struck me, but the origin story, right? That a lot of them have had really traumatic beginnings. They were abandoned. They had a hard life. And in some ways you say they get to choose who they're going to be. Like, how are you going to deal with that tragedy? How's it going to shape who you are? And so maybe say a little bit more about that. And then,
I love that chapter too. I had fun writing it for all of the comic book nerds who will be reading. But the idea is that, an origin story is incredibly important to a comic book hero, that you can't be a hero until you learn your origin story. Every villain and every hero, actually, they choose. They all have these very difficult beginnings, and some make this choice to say that my beginnings, my origins, put me on a path where I must transform things, or puts you on a path of saying that I am so angry at the world, I want people to be in pain just the way I am. Peter Parker makes a decision that his uncle is killed because he did not use his powers in the appropriate way. That's Spider-Man there, Shane.
Thank you.
Batman is very interesting because he's motivated by the fact that his parents were killed in front of him by someone who used a handgun. So he becomes this anti-gun activist and hero at the same time. So he will never use a gun and he will never kill becomes also very important. But he believes in, he believes in retribution too. That's a whole other thing about Batman. But then you have the whole X narrative and Black Panther. And Rick Grimes from Walking Dead is one of the fascinating because he has no superpowers. His superpowers literally is the fact that he just believes that there can be a civil society in the midst of a dystopian world. That's all he's trying to do. Can we bring some degree of humanity, love, and caring? And he's trying to do it for his family until he realizes, I want to do this for the remnants of humanity. Mm-hmm. So you take these ideas of an origin story, and I talk about Dr. King. That before Dr. King becomes the Dr. King that we know about, his origin story is on Auburn Avenue. I spoke the other day and for a King celebration. And I said that many people lift up Boston and Crozier and all of these spaces where Dr. King developed, but it was really Auburn Avenue. He steps out from his house. On one side of the street are middle-class homes, doctors, lawyers, preachers. On the other side of the same street are shotgun homes, where you have people who are domestics and people who are struggling. He turns left. He's walking to his father's church. Before he gets to that church, he passes by the Harbar Brooks funeral home that's owned by a Black woman, the only Black woman who owns a funeral home in the state of Georgia. So he sees a woman breaking patriarchy at the age of 12, and it's part of his origin story. He then walks past the Atlanta Daily World, the only daily Black newspaper that lifts up lynching and the power of historically Black colleges. Then he passes by WERD, the Word Radio, a radio station that is lifting up positive things that are happening in the African-American community all across Atlanta. He passes by the Atlanta Life Insurance Company that insures and provides money for the freedom movement. Goes by Mother Bethel, AME Church, where Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, who at one time was pastor, and before there was a James Cone, Bishop Henry McNeil Turner said this. He said, God is Black, deal with it, because God understands all about our struggles. So he's passing by that. Then before he gets to his dad's church, he goes by Wheat Street Baptist Church, where William Holmes Borders was the pastor. His graduate of Morehouse, stands 6 feet 5 inches tall, deep booming voice. And he was also a poet. And when he would close a message, he had a poem that probably everybody listening probably has heard it, but didn't know it was him, because it was remixed by a person by the name of Jesse Jackson. Go, I am somebody. I am Langston Hughes and a poet. I am an aviator in Bessie Armstrong. I'm a musician in Duke Ellington. I am somebody. I'm beautifully, fearfully, wonderfully made. Dr. King used to sneak into that balcony at age 12. Then he went to his father's church. And then he had to get on a trolley. And I love the way my father says it. He said he got on a trolley to go to Morehouse. He had to sit in the back. He said, but because he had all of this somebodyness, his body was in the back, but his mind was in the front. Made his way to Morehouse College, steps on the campus, and then Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays becomes his mentor. In other words, his origin story, that all of that somebodyness was poured into him, that the hero that he becomes spiritually for us later begins on this small little street of Black people in the 4th Ward of Atlanta, known as Sweet Auburn.
That was beautiful.
Man. I got that. Like, hairs on my arm are standing up. Come on. Yeah.
That was pretty. I've never heard.
So beautiful. And,
Can I ask a
yes,
question?
I want you to.
So, one, neither one of us watched The Walking Dead. So we didn't know that character. We both had to research that one. When you think of your own, like when you talk about your comic book heroes, they're in those stories in general, there always is this pinnacle point where a decision has to be made, right? And their lives are changed. In your own particular origin story, since we all have one, is there like a pinnacle? Do you think back to a pinnacle point, or is it more of just this evolution into who you have become and will continue to be?
No, I think it's a combination of two things. I think there's a pinnacle point. I think the pinnacle point was being at Morehouse College. I went to Morehouse to be a filmmaker.
Yeah, you said that.
Right,
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to be a cinematographer. I was so, I still am a film nerd, very much so. I wanted to be like Ernest Dickerson. He was the cinematographer for Spike Lee, because he just made people, especially Black people, look so beautiful. I'd never seen anything quite like it. I love the films of Akira Kurosawa, who was a Japanese filmmaker. I like Martin Scorsese, David Lean, Charles Burnett, and then there's a woman by the name of Julie Dash who did a movie called Daughters of the Dust that I thought she was one of the most incredible. It's about the Gullah Islands in South Carolina. And I'd never seen anything like it. My wife and I, we saw it, and we were dating at the time, and we were like, we never see anything like this. It was unbelievable. Just a brilliant, wonderful filmmaker. And I always thought that the preaching tradition was a form of storytelling. I said, but if we could attach images to the story, then we decolonize the imagination. So I saw that filmmakers had this power to decolonize imagination, just as preachers do, just as writers do, as poets do. I saw it as another form of artistry. And then, that I was going in that direction, and then I got kicked into this other direction of ministry, and I was still not trying to. I was like, I'll be an academic. I was like, I don't want to pastor. I had too much great respect for passion. It's like, there's no way that I could do what I'd seen my father do and other people. There's just absolutely no way, because I consider my dad just the greatest preacher I've ever heard in my life. And he lives it. In every way, he's an embodiment. He lives a sermon versus just preaching one, and deeply genuine and loving and caring. And his storytelling ability is on par with some of the greatest storytellers, I think, in history. I mean, he can do things that it's just unbelievable what he can do, and so simple, so just subtle, and takes his seat, and he's done, and everybody's passed out, all over the place.
Slain in the spirit. Well, I want to make sure we talk about jazz in a minute, but I was thinking about this, origin story, and you kind of move from the individual to thinking about our country and the sort of crisis that we're in so many different ways. But there's this quote from Marilyn Robinson that you have: the Constitution of the U.S. is one of the world's greatest works of fiction. And so, but you sort of invite us to think of reworking the origin story of America. I think of that great line, "America could be," right? But it's easy for me to think an individual can choose that, but when a large chunk of our country is even ignoring some of the true origins of our country, it's hard to think, how are we all going to share the same narrative? So maybe say a little bit more about where you find the hope that we can rework this story of America.
Well, I'm talking with the Red Letter Christian Organization. So, this is where the hope is right here. I believe that it's the poets, it's the singers, it's the musicians, it's the dancers, it's our painters, it's our teachers, it's mothers, it's fathers, it's the coach that does the work of reworking the origin story. That's why I'm also a big sports fan, and the sports story of people, of how they come to be and how they connect with other people, that they're changing the origin story. Muhammad Ali was an editor for the American quote unquote story, just as Malcolm X was, just as Dr. King was, just as Fannie Lou Hamer is. So all of these people are serving, if you look on the list, they are editors, because they realize that some of this stuff needs to be redacted. Some of these paragraphs need to be taken out, and there needs to be things to be added. That's what a good editor does. They remove and they add. And each of us has the ability, when a policy is destructive, we serve as editors to redact. And when there are ideas that can allow us to flourish, there are paragraphs that we must add. Du Bois calls it, we are the yet to be United States of America. And that's where we are. America is a myth. It's an idea. It is something that is yet to be born. that is yearning to be born. And when people are marginalized, when they are silent, when they are placed in the corner and the full story is not told, then we end up living a lie and a myth that becomes destructive to everyone.
Yeah, I think of those powerful words too. Of your words make me think of Valerie Carr, the actress lawyer who gives us vision of the current darkness. It kind of relates to your dancing in the darkness, and she says it invites us to say, is this the darkness of the tomb of a country that's dying, or is this the darkness of the womb? And,
she preached that thing.
If y'all haven't seen that,
like, you are preaching Valerie on this thing right here. When I heard, I was shouting, and the folks were shouting at Bishop Barber's church. They went in. That was just a beautiful, beautiful image, because it's the truth. Some of us want it to be a tomb moment. And for those of us who hold on to this idea of love and of hope and of justice, we said that this can be a womb, but it is a very dangerous pregnancy. That when you are dealing with something as fragile as this moment, you got to have the right healthcare workers and nurses around the mother so that they don't lose the baby. And this is where we are. What type of healthcare providers will we be for a democracy that is yet to be birthed?
So one of the it's so powerful. One of the other images you kind of invite us to think about is jazz, and you're known as the Blue Notes preacher. You got you got my wife is also she knows every genre of music. Our friend Leroy Barber challenged her to a lip sync contest. She shredded him. I know you might be listening, Leroy. So much. So which song was it that you did that we got a note, Reverend Otis? We got a note from the estate of
Bill Withers.
Bill Withers. Her lip sync was so good it was starting to go viral, and they had to take it down.
Remove it. They made us remove it.
Come on. Bill Withers, by the way, is like one of the greatest songwriters ever.
People, did you watch Still Bill?
So my wife absolutely adores Bill Withers because of that documentary. She's just like, I love him so much.
I know. You love him even more. You're like, the man gave up so much just to be a family man.
Just to raise his child. Oh, it's just like, oh man.
He's
so
amazing.
I use Bill Withers in my preaching class.
Do you really?
We teach Grandma's Hands, his song Grandma's Hands, to talk about his imagery of how he's telling this story. And it's, if you can learn how to preach in the manner in which Bill Withers writes this song, so you'll be doing okay. This is I think it's one of the most fantastic sermons ever.
Yeah.
It's a great song. And one of the things, with you've helped craft this whole theology of jazz, and you say, America's chords are clashing right now. But you say a little bit more about in the book, you talk about jazz both as improv, but also as this kind of harmony, but not homogeny. It's beautiful. So what are some cues we can take from that tradition?
I believe that jazz teaches America democracy before America even understands what democracy is all about. It's the only democratic music. It's not the symphony, because the symphony demands that you follow the conductor. That's hierarchy. Jazz flows a little bit differently, and the beautiful thing about its origin is what's so exciting to me. That speaks about the idea of democracy. One, it's born in New Orleans. For anybody who's from New Orleans, I just think it's one of the greatest cities ever. That here you have in New Orleans, Louisiana, where a combination of free Africans, many of them from Haiti, who are bringing the idea of freedom because of the Haitian Revolution to New Orleans. They have enslaved Africans, along with Spanish, French, indigenous people living in the same space, but on Sunday, the enslaved were given free space and time, place known as the Congo Square. And in that place, the Congo Square, that's the singing and the music was played, and they would hear these different rhythms from different spaces. So that's the birth of jazz is in that space. But what's beautiful about jazz is you have all of these instruments playing together that are not supposed to play together. So the saxophone was specifically designed for a marching band. And saxophones are not supposed to play with pianos. The piano is out of this European classical. And then you have a trap drum set that is supposed to be on 1, 2, 1, 2, but it's using African polyrhythms. And then you have this bass that's you're supposed to use a bow. They said, nope, we're going to use our fingers. And every instrument has the right to solo. In other words, I can bring something to the table. And the saxophone never tells the piano, you have to sound like me. Piano never tells the drum, you better sound like me. Or the bass, you got to sound just like me. Everyone can communicate and offer something to the composition out of their own unique cultural narrative. And that itself is the way in which we want democracy. If we all can learn the power of the solo, then we can play, in the words of John Coltrane, we can actually play a Love Supreme collectively together and do something that is unique. But America doesn't want that. It wants the symphony. It wants one conductor to demand that you play exactly what is on the paper, instead of the risk and the courage to say that the saxophone has something to say, the piano has something to say, the drummer has something to say, the bass player has something to say that, you know, women have something to say, men have something to say. If you're Black, you have something to say. If you're Muslim, you have something to say. If you're agnostic, you have something to say. If you're Christian, you have something to say. We all have something to say. And that's the beauty of a jazz democratic narrative. It's more difficult, but it's definitely more beautiful.
All right, y'all, listen up. We just got a few minutes. We got 10 minutes left, 15 minutes left with Reverend Otis Moss III. So we're monitoring, we're on all kinds of different platforms. So y'all are watching on different places, but you can put it in the chat. Our team at Red Letter Christians are looking at comments and questions, or even just tell us, hey, and where you're listening in from. We're so glad for this hour together, brother. And, I when you were thinking about the music, I was struck, as it's a little bit different strain, but when you talk about Amazing Grace, I've always known that that's a complicated thing. John Newton, he participated in the trafficking of human beings. He did have this conversion, but it almost doesn't happen as crystal clear, as beautiful as you want. It's sometime later, years later, that he actually, calls for the abolition of slavery. So he's a work in progress. But I thought, of Obama down in Emmanuel when he's saying it. I mean, there's so many ways that Amazing Grace has kind of hit us. But you added a new depth to it when you talked about how the pentatonic scale may have come from the folks that are on that ship. So I think we hear this song a lot. So maybe you could just add that little piece of the book while we're at it, man.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Oh, I appreciate that. I mean, Amazing Grace is a fascinating song, but so many people know it. And we've been told the John Newton side of it. But there is another side that is told from mouth to ear from people who were in South Carolina and Georgia and Alabama, and especially these coastal regions, is the fact that, we always were told, John Newton, he was saying that's where he wrote the song. He's praying to the Lord. But there's a story among Black people of African descent, that said Newton really didn't have anything to do with any of this, that there was a sound in the hull of the ship. And that sound was so beautiful, this hum, that in the midst of this storm, that it made its way to heaven. And an angel tapped God on the shoulder and said, you need to hear this. And God simply said, shh, and stilled the storm. And when you look at the creation of Amazing Grace, it says words by Newton, melody unknown. The melody, according to ethnomusicologists, it's not a European melody. It's a melody that's pentatonic. It's a melody that the only way you can play it is you got to have Black keys on the piano, because all spirituals can be played with Black keys only. So I love to say that, if you remove the Black keys, that you can have grace, but it won't be amazing. So in other words, you got to make sure that you add the Blackness to it. So it's going to be Amazing Grace. And so the song in many ways is the merging of two traditions, African melody and humming, because the way Amazing Grace does not sound like other hymns you've heard. listen to the melody. It's not a European melody. It's a melody that fits more in line with African-American spirituals. It fits that melody. And so here we have an African melody with European text. And we all sing it and all know it. It is the most popular song in America because it merges two communities that essentially were sequestered in ways that they were never to play with each other. But something happened with the music.
Pretty.
Well, you got I don't want to cut you off. You got any other questions?
I was
going
taking
to
notes.
ask him to share a little bit about the that story with the Westboro Baptist Church is so powerful. Can we ask him a little bit about that?
Yeah.
I was thinking, when Dr. King says that no matter how much you hate us, you can't keep us from loving you. That you can throw us in jail, you can burn down our houses, you can threaten the lives of our children, we will still love you, but we'll wear you down by our love. And you tell the powerful story of your congregation that responded with such hatred, with prayer, love, and some Pentecostal fire.
Yeah.
And so you don't have to tell all of it. I don't want to do the spoiler alert because it's such a powerful part of the book, y'all. Y'all all got you got to read it yourself. But that story, I think, especially today, when we're seeing emboldened hatred in so many different manifestations, we need the same kind of courage and faith that your community showed when Westboro showed up.
Well, and creativity with the choir.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank
That
you.
was
Thank you. So for those who may not be familiar, Westboro, I hate to use the word church even with them. It just bothers me. But this Westboro group of people led by a lead terrorist showed up at our church. And what they said with the signs and everything, from racial epithets that were offered, these horrific things that were said about Senator Obama at the time, and then about our church. It was just terrific. And of course, they're on the south side of Chicago. They were trying to, get someone on video doing something horrific. And I said, you all really don't know where you are. But anyway, that was a whole other thing. And so when we heard that they had shown up, somebody said, there's a group out here. They are saying some of those vile things. And this is right before a service. And the choir was about to march in. And I stopped the choir. And because really the Lord had just placed this in my spirit, saying, I need your help right now. These people are outside. They are saying the most vile things. And, our elders and children and families, they're trying to get in the church. We're already dealing with all these, the media gauntlet. And now we got these knuckleheads out here. And so the choir in their robes marched, instead of marching in the sanctuary, they marched outside and they surrounded the Westboro church and started singing This Little Light of Mine and sang it to the glory of God so loud that their megaphones couldn't be heard. And I'll never forget that this lady, her name is Hattie, and Hattie stands on a good day, 5'1", on a good day.
Yeah.
And sing, she can sing too. Miss Hattie, my son, just adores Miss Hattie. She's like, hey, nobody sing like Miss Hattie. I feel like I went to Mississippi when she sings. She always said that. And she's standing in front of this stout guy, had to be about 6'2", 6'3", big guy. And she's just all in his face. This little light. and to the point where he fell back off the edge of the sidewalk and stumbled. And they got their stuff and they went on away. And then when the choir came into church, I'm telling you, we talk about a shouting good time, because the choir was emboldened. They were like, don't you know? I mean, they came in with swag. They were like, we just ran hate away.
Yeah.
They sang. They said, you don't understand. You said, my melody can run hate away. I mean, they sang melodies from heaven for real. I mean, it was a beautiful moment to be able to witness.
Wow. So good. there's a question I want to ask as we'll wrap up in a second. But as I was listening to that, I thought of, that time where we were holding a vigil and a really public lament, as you talk about. We were, grieving one more life that was lost to a gun, and we were outside of the shooter shop, is what it was called, the gun shop right here around the corner, which incidentally is now closed down and is housing for veterans. But before it was that, it was one of the worst gun shops in our country for guns sold that were used in track to crimes. And so we were praying outside of it, and these gun folks came, in full force, and they posted it on the internet, bring your guns. And we tried to take a posture of de-escalation. I wish we had the Trinity Choir there, Reverend Otis, but we did our best. But we just started praying the Lord's Prayer, and they started singing God Bless America, just belting it out over the Lord's Prayer. And even to this day, as I think about it, it's one of the times where I've felt like I was encountering real demonic forces, not in those people, but in that moment, that there were things happening, forces at work that are not the flesh and blood, like Ephesians says, but the principalities and powers. And that this question that someone asked is about that. They said, is it just me, or does it feel like there's demonic energy everywhere right now? So I wanted to hear, you're a pastor, you got the charismatic thing going on, but some of us grew up with a version of spiritual warfare that was weird and doesn't have the depth that I kind of think of it now. So I wonder what you would say to that question from YouTube, I think it was, of someone talking about what is the role of the demonic in all of this, and how do we combat it spiritually?
There is destructive energy and evil that is present, but we have to be careful about giving too much power to the enemy, of saying that it is ever present and it is omnipresent, and giving it the character of our God. Because part of the thing that what the enemy will do, what this destructive forces will do, is they will get a microphone and make you think 2 are 2,000. My father tells a wonderful story of a man who wanted some frog legs, and he said he was going to buy some. He said, no, you don't have to buy them. His friend said, I can get you some frog legs. They're right down over here at the river. I'll make sure that when you have your party, you're gonna have 1,000 frog legs. Can't you hear them? They're making a lot of noise. So the party comes. He's got all his guests. He got thousands of people, and and he shows up, and the man comes in. He's with 6 frog legs. He said, "Man, you said I could have 1,000 frog legs." What happened? He said, "Well, once I got down to the river, I found out that the 3 sounded like 3,000." And part of the problem is with social media networks, with people who own media conglomerates like Fox, we will think that the 3 frogs are 3,000. But there are more red letter Christians. There are more Trinitarians from Trinity United Church of Christ. There are more poor people's campaigns. There are more mothers who deeply love their children, fathers who care about their boys and girls, teachers who want to see their students develop. There are more of them. We just don't have the mic. Once we get the mic, or repair the mics that we have, we will notice that the 3 frogs don't have the authority and power in our world.
Glory.
That was beautiful.
Yes, that was powerful.
Have you ever been frog gigging?
No, I haven't.
We grew up frog gigging over here, man. Yeah, you got to go on a night where there's no moon, because they can see you coming if there's a full moon. So and you got the flash.
Ooh. Now I've eaten some frog. I like some frog legs.
I do too.
Well, what a gift. I was going to read a little quote to close this out, but you got any other?
No, go ahead. That was my last
Reverend Moss,
question.
you got any? I'm gonna give you the last word, but I was gonna read a quote. You want to close?
Oh, you
anything
go
out?
right ahead. We'll give it to Master Shane here.
Well, it is you that I'm reading,
He's
but,
reading your book.
This is beautiful, y'all. This is near the end of Dr. Otis Moss's the third's book, Dancing in the Darkness. People often ask me where we will find the next Martin Luther King Jr. And I tell them, we do not need one. We need hundreds of kings. We need thousands. We need kings and queens. Frederick Douglass's, Robert Smalls's, Anna Julia Cooper's, Ida B. Wells's, W.E.B. Du Bois's, Malcolm X's, Fred Hampton's, Ella Baker's, Fannie Lou Hamer's, Toni Morrison's, Bell Hooks's, princes and princesses, warriors and priestesses, local superheroes and freedom fighters by the millions.
That was pretty.
So may we stand up and dance in the darkness. Thank you for inspiring us tonight, my brother. It's always a gift to be together.
It is always a joy to be with you all. Thank you so very much. And to the RLC community, the Red Letter Christian community, thank you for the work and the witness that you're providing in this world, and that you all are dancing.
We're dancing.